It's time to spotlight the greatest tales of another Batman villain. A classic rogue who for some reason seldom get any respect these days. We're talking about Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin. True, Penguin has even less classic stories than the Riddler, but that doesn't mean good Pengy tales aren't out there. You just gotta put in an extra effort to find them. However, with this list at your handy disposal, you won't have to. Keep in mind though that this list is merely my own personal opinion and not fact. But anyway, without further ado, let's get to it. Number 10. No Man's Land. No Man's Land is of course the massive arc that spanned the entire year of 1999. A whole slew of creators contributed to it, so it's impossible for me to name them all. The premise of No Man's Land was that an earthquake had hit Gotham and destroyed the entire infrastructure. It was so bad, in fact, the US government abandoned the city, sealed it off, and declared it a no man's land. Whoever remained within Gotham's city limits were left to fend for themselves. With no law and order, gangs formed, and with no need for cash anymore, people started to trade wares instead. Supplies like water, food, and weapons became Gotham's new currency. The master trader, or barter king if you will, of the No Man's Land was the Penguin. Anything you needed, he had it. It came at a price, of course, and Penguin always took his bite. During No Man's Land, Oswald became the unofficial king of Gotham. While everyone else lived in filth and misery, the Penguin lived in luxury. Pengy was able to keep this operation up because he was the only one in the ruined city with a connection to the outside world. That's how he got all his needed wares. In my opinion, this was a perfect usage of the character for that event. It just fit him so well, and yet ended up being one of the most memorable villains of the No Man's Land saga. It was also the first to establish the Penguin as the King of Gotham, a trope we've seen again many times since. Number 9. Pieces of Penguin Cold. A 1984 two-putter by Doug Mensch, Don Newton, and Gene Colan. It was published across Batman 374 and Detective Comics 541. A comic featuring the classic supervillain Pengy, before he'd been reimagined as a mobster. It's a sort of meta story where Penguin is finally fed up with no one taking him seriously. Tired of people dismissing him due to his comical appearance, the old bird has decided to prove once and for all what a dangerous master criminal he truly is. He's going to pull off the most diabolical scheme of his crooked career. Steal the plans to a top-secret government weapons system and sell it to the Soviet Union. Yep, Penguin has gone traitor. Or has he? Is his scheme even cleverer than anyone could ever have imagined? Even too clever for the Batman to truly crack? Well, without spoiling too much, it kinda is. And for once, Penguin was too smart for everyone else involved. I'd say this story pretty effectively achieved what it set out to do. Prove that Penguin is a serious threat, and that you shouldn't underestimate him. This is another common trope with the character, but this is one of the stories to handle it best. It's also among the best stories to feature the old classic version of Pengy, a version that's sadly overlooked and almost forgotten these days. What else is good about this comic? Well, we've got an exploding robot penguin. That's pretty damn awesome. And Batman and Penguin have their final showdown in Antarctica, which is just so fitting and cool. Number 8. Bullies. Published in Batman Volume 2, issue 23.3 in 2013. That's a lot of threes. This one-shot was written by Frank Thierry and drawn by Christian Deuce. It's officially part of an event called Forever Evil, but that doesn't really play into the story whatsoever. It's basically standalone and you don't need to worry about reading anything else to understand it. Anyway, the story focuses on Oswald reminding people that you don't want to mess with him. First, he catches a group of patrons cheating in his casino, and promptly teaches them that was a bad idea. And then he deals with the governor of whatever state Gotham is in, who just so happens to be Ozzy's old pal from childhood. The governor has previously always helped Ozzy out whenever he was in trouble, and looked the other way when it was needed. But now he's had enough, and has decided to take a stand against his old friend's corruption. Bad idea. In a sense, this story is pretty similar to the previous entry. It essentially serves as a reminder that the Penguin is a really dangerous threat. He's not to be taken lightly. It's told in a completely different fashion though. While the other one was a fun supervillain romp, this is a brutal gangster story. It even takes some cues from classic gangster movies like The Godfather and Casino. It's really one of the best stories to feature the modern gangster take on the Penguin. It also offers up one of the scariest takes on the character. After reading this one, I doubt you'd be too eager to mess with the Penguin. Number 7. Partners in Plunder. From Batman issue 169, published in 1965. It was written by Ed Herron and drawn by Sheldon Moldoff. A real Silver Age classic, this comic was the basis for the very first Penguin episode on the 60s Batman TV show. So yes, it is naturally super campy. The plot itself is like a joke, but that's of course what's so fun about it. In the story, the Penguin is unable to hatch a new clever scheme. He simply can't think of one. He then gets the brilliant idea to let Batman come up with a scheme for him. But why would Batman do that? Well, good old Pengers is going to trick him into doing it. He's going to pull off a bunch of bizarre penguin-related stunts throughout Gotham, like for example releasing a giant-sized umbrella in the middle of a Gotham street. Batman will then piece together all of these bizarre events and assume they're clues to the Penguin's latest heist. Meanwhile, Oswald will listen in, and whatever conclusion Batman comes to, that's the crime Penguin will commit. Yeah, like I said, the plot is like a joke, and that's what I love about it. It's a nice twist on the regular Penguin caper we've seen in so many other issues. Most Penguin comics from this era basically blend together, but not this one. This one really stands out due to its odd premise. I don't really have a whole lot else to say about it. It's simply a super fun issue with tons of Silver Age charm. But of course, if you can't stand a goofy, campy Batman, then this one is obviously not for you. Number 6. The Penguin on Parole. Another real old and goldie, this one was published in Batman number 38 in 1946. The writer was Don Cameron and the artist Jim Mooney. While in prison, the Penguin is foolishly tasked with manufacturing umbrellas. Naturally, he seizes the opportunity to secretly create a weaponized umbrella. A flamethrower umbrella, which he plans to use for an escape. However, before he can make his escape, the warden of the prison accidentally activates the umbrella, setting the room on fire. Uncharacteristically, the Penguin saves the warden from a fiery doom, and is soon after paroled for his heroic action. Mind you, the warden never realized it was the umbrella that started the fire. And what does the newly paroled Pengy do? Immediately return to a life of crime? Well, no. And that's why this story is so good. Oswald genuinely tries to turn over a new leaf and be a law-abiding citizen for once. However, it doesn't work out so well. For starters, he can't find a good enough job, and things go really bad when the new cartoon Peter Penguin becomes super popular. Due to his physical resemblance to the silly cartoon character, Pengy is made into the laughingstock of Gotham. No matter where he goes, people compare him to Peter Penguin and mock him. Eventually, Ozzy has enough and decides to get revenge on Peter Penguin and Gotham. Yeah, it's a pretty tragic story. Penguin had finally reformed and become a good guy, only for Gotham to turn him into a villain once again. It's like a sad curse. He just can't catch a break. This story was pretty ahead of its times. It's the first reform story for Penguin, and one of the earliest villain reform stories in comics, period. It's also the first story to truly treat the Penguin as a character, rather than simply a foil for Batman. And it's also the first comic to deal with Penguin's insecurities about his physical appearance. With all these firsts, and it being a good story to boot, naturally I had to include it on the list. Number 5. Penguin Triumphant. Written by John Ostrander and drawn by Joe Staton, This one-shot graphic novel was published in 1992 to coincide with the release of Batman Returns. The story has nothing to do with the Penguin from the movie though. The early 90s were strange times for Oswald Cobblepot. The character hadn't yet been reimagined as a mob boss, and no one really knew how to portray him, as the old classic version just didn't fit the times anymore. That's what this story is actually about. Penguin is tired of Batman always fouling up his crimes, so he decides to become the type of criminal Batman doesn't investigate. A stockbroker. Yes, Penguin is going legit, but certainly not straight. He's got a plan to manipulate the stock market and earn him millions. Millions without even having to pull off a single heist. It's a Penguin for the modern times. However, it doesn't really last too long, as Oswald realizes legit crime is boring. After all, it isn't really the money Penguin's after. It's the thrill of the score, the action, the excitement, the fun in putting egg on Batman's face. This change to Penguin's MO wasn't really meant to be permanent. It was only intended as a what-if scenario. But it did end up being oddly prophetic, as just a couple of years later, Ozzy was permanently reimagined in a similar fashion. In retrospect, this story stands as a prophecy of times to come, but also as a fascinating deconstruction of the classic Penguin. It's also simply a very fun story, where we get to see Penguin in unusual scenarios, like socializing with Bruce Wayne at Wayne Manor, for instance. The story also excellently demonstrates how clever Penguin truly is, and we even get Batman himself admitting the old bird is probably the only man who's smarter than him. Sorry, Eddie. Number 4. He Who Laughs Last. Published in a series called Joker's Asylum in 2008. Joker's Asylum was a series of villain-centric one-shots narrated by the Joker himself. This particular one was written by Jason Aaron and drawn by Jason Pearson. While investigating one of his warehouses, the Penguin spots a miserable sex slave for sale locked up in a cage. For some reason, the otherwise foul, cold-hearted man takes pity on this woman, whose name is Violet. He then buys Violet to secure her freedom. Violet then falls in love with the hideous man for rescuing her, and likewise do Oswald fall in love with her. Yes, it's a romance story. Penguin in love. It's a very tragic romance though, as Violet eventually begins to discover her lover's dark side. The reason he's the most feared crime lord in Gotham. Naturally, it was a romance not made to last. A very fascinating look at Penguin. He does have a better side, and is even capable of great compassion and kindness. But the darkness is always there too, the monster within, and it will always, eventually, reveal itself. According to this story though, it's a monster born out of insecurities. Yes, here we are again with the insecurities. It's an integral part to the Penguin's character. Often when he does something truly evil, it's simply a response to feeling hurt. And he's been hurt so many times throughout his life due to his physical appearance. He doesn't know how to respond any longer but to viciously strike back, even if it's unwarranted. Several comics have explored this part of the character, but this is certainly one to do it the best. Number 3. The Penguin Returns. A two-part story published across Batman issues 548 to 549 in 1997. It was written by Doug Moench and drawn by Kelly Jones. Yep, Moench returns on this list. He's definitely been one of the best Penguin writers throughout Batman's history. His previous entry on this list took place when Ozzy was still his old supervillain self. By the time this comic came out though, Penguin had been reimagined as the mob boss he is today. Clearly, Moench felt the old Penguin needed a proper farewell though, and that's what this story is. In it, Oswald is tired of sitting around in the Iceberg Lounge, barking orders at goons. He misses the old days when he himself went out on capers and dueled with the Batman. So, he decides to do that once again, if only for a while. Yep, the old Penguin is back, and he's better than ever. To make sure Gotham knows he's back, he leaves obvious Penguin clues at the crime scenes. Clues, but not evidence. There's nothing Batman can prove, and Ozzy has the perfect alibi of being the legit owner of the Iceberg Lounge, not some gallivanting super crook. Penguin gets to have his cake and eat it too. Another great comic that showcases that money isn't really Penguin's main motivation. Money is nice, for sure, but what Oswald truly loves is battling the Batman and a perfect caper. Or at least he used to. The modern Penguin is different. This comic is the last time we ever saw the old classic Pengers in action, and he sure did go out with a bang. Number 2. Pain and Prejudice. Penguin, Pain and Prejudice is a 5-issue miniseries starring old Pengers himself as the protagonist. It was published in 2012 and was written by Greg Hurwitz and drawn by Szymon Kudranski. The story is actually very similar to the number 4 spot, the Joker's Asylum issue. It heavily deals with Penguin's insecurities, how he punishes people he feels have offended him, and how all of it stems from a history of abuse. Oswald also meets a lady in this story and begins a romance with her. This time around, it's an awkward blind woman whom Ozzy feels a connection to. It's a far more fleshed out relationship than the one he had with Violet. It's also, due to Penguin's nature, doomed to fail. Flashbacks to Oswald's past has been seen in many different comics, including several on this list. However, this miniseries explores Oswald's origin story in detail. It's one of few comics to really flesh out his background, and it's certainly the one to do it the very best. Never before have we seen the Penguin's childhood like this, and how he became who he is makes perfect sense here. Even though I'm putting this story on the number 2 spot, I'm gonna have to say it is the greatest Penguin story ever told. It's the definitive Penguin tale. He's never been as fleshed out as he is here. He's never made as much sense as he does here. And he's never been scarier than he is here. At the same time, he's rarely been as sympathetic. It's a comic that really makes you get the Penguin, and it's without a doubt the best to feature the modern gangster Pengy. If you're only gonna read one Penguin comic in your life, I highly suggest you make it this one. And if you know people who scoff at the character and regard him as a lame goofball, then give them this comic. They'll most likely change their mind. And now, not for the greatest Penguin story of all time, but my personal favorite. Number 1. Lovebird. One of 2 stories featured in 1987's Batman Annual number 11. Lovebird was written by Max Allan Collins and drawn by the legendary Norm Breyfogle. It features the Penguin being released on parole. Again, it's another Penguin reform story, and it is without a doubt the very best one. Again, Ozzy is genuine about his reform. This time his motivator is a woman. Yep, it's yet another Penguin romance story too. That's another common trope with the character. I guess, despite his appearance, he's a real ladies' man. Anyway, this lady is named Davina Partridge, a socialite and bird lover whom Ozzy met through the personal column of the Ornithological News while he was in prison. Davina refuses to marry a criminal though, which is why Oswald is determined to walk the straight and narrow from now on. He's even opened up an umbrella factory to make an honest buck instead of a crooked one. Seems like things are finally looking up for old Pengers, doesn't it? Well, except there's one big problem. Batman. The ever-paranoid Dark Knight refuses to believe his old archenemy has gone straight. It must be another trick. A sham to hide his new devious scheme, and Batman is determined to figure out what it is, even though there is none. Yeah, this is one Batman comic where Batman is pretty much the villain. We actually root for the Penguin in this one, and it's easily the most sympathetic he's ever been. This comic is just so damn adorable and fun. I never have enough of it, no matter how many times I read it. Does it paint up Pengy as really scary? As a big villain and major threat? No, not at all. That's what Pain and Prejudice is for, and why that's a more ideal Penguin story. What this one does is make the characters super likable and adorable as all hell. I get that this comic isn't for everyone. If you want all your Batman stories super gritty and grim, it's obviously not for you. However, if you're open to a light-hearted and incredibly charming Batman comic, then I highly recommend giving this one a read. And there you have it, the best Penguin comics, in my opinion. Hopefully, this video helps the old bird gain some much-needed respect. Next up for a top 10 is the Duke of Duality himself, Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Except, it isn't a mere top 10, it's a top 22 list. Yeah, I'm going all out for old Harv and counting down his top 22 greatest stories. It's probably gonna be 2 hours long. Anyway, as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.